Bruce Lorincz, and this show is called Bruce on the Loose. I talk to a lot of people in the Wadsworth area, and we go ahead and talk to the schools and businesses now, city government. Matt Hiscock is with us today, and he's the Director of Public Safety in the City of Wadsworth. And Matt, I don't think your job gets any easier with recruitment and development of the city. And now we have a very important EMS levy on the ballot.
We do. Thanks for having me, Bruce. I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
Now, sometimes people get confused and think the EMS is aligned with the fire department or law enforcement. It's its own separate entity, isn't it?
It is, actually. While many of the personnel matters are handled by both fire and EMS staff, we actually operate it much differently in terms of the divisions. We almost operate it fiscally as its own enterprise operation. So yes, the fire and EMS department oftentimes are thought of as one unit, but they are divided into different units as both financially and in some operations.
COVID-19 has impacted businesses, corporations, schools, and certainly the city. How has it reflected on the services of EMS?
Absolutely. The pandemic was a challenging period of time for us. It still presents challenges for us, from everything from increased supply and PPE usage to all the way down to increased runs for service. We really had an explosion in the types of calls for service that our staff handled, and all the way to concerns about the health and safety of our staff, whether it be increased contagious disease protocols, and whether it be keeping our staff safe and immune from some of those issues.
And Joanne just showed a few clips of some of the various services you provide. And how many units does the city have?
We operate 4 advanced life support ambulances. We currently staff 2 of those ambulances 24/7 at both of our stations. But what we've seen is an increase in 3rd and 4th ambulance calls, where we really do have a demand for both that 3rd and 4th ambulance.
So like last Friday, the Wadsworth Grizzlies were home at Arkwright Stadium. You might have something alerted there, and there could be other at an assisted living place, or someone has an accident, a child falls out of a tree or something. You need to be flexible to respond to the needs of the people.
That's absolutely right, Bruce. We actually operated on a Monday home football game, if you will. We'll have our 2 squads at each one of the stations that at any given time can be out handling a call for service. In addition, we have that 3rd squad positioned and stationed down at the stadium for any events that might happen at the game.
You know, I taught government for a few years, and a lot of students were very excited about national and state elections, but I always turned it around and said, your local election, school board, zoning issues, fire, law enforcement, EMS are the bedrock of the community, and the community needs to support those services.
That's absolutely right. You know, EMS and local government services in general find their enumerated powers within the Ohio Constitution. In addition, for specific municipal services, Article 7 of the Ohio Revised Code talks about the types of services that can be authorized and be provided by municipal governments. EMS is one of those services.
Even education, elections are local matters, but they do get funding from the state of Ohio and some federal funds, I'm sure. I'm sure there are state regulations that you have to adhere to, but as far as funding, you get very little dollars from the state.
That is correct. EMS is really a levy-driven funding mechanism. We take a modern approach and we try to split the cost of EMS so it's not solely placed upon taxpayers. So we split our funding requirements between not only a levy-based tax, but also user fees as well as contractual obligations in those fees.
I'm sure you and the city and the leadership of the various law enforcement and fire and EMS try to be good stewards of the money, but equipment and the trucks and everything you're purchasing, I'm sure, have really gone up.
That's right. That's right. EMS is no different than what we experience in our personal lives, whether it be for supplies and equipment costs, whether it be replacement of actual ambulances. All of those costs, like in all parts of our lives, continue to increase. And the levy is a primary factor in making sure that we can meet the needs of the community, but also the needs of the department in those expense areas, both now and into the future.
How many EMS employees does Wadsworth have?
We currently have 43 EMS certified employees. They range anywhere from EMT basics all the way up to paramedics.
All right, what would be the difference? What could a basic do versus a paramedic?
Sure. EMT basic is the basic level of EMT certification, and they can provide basically a little bit more enhanced emergency medical provisions than sort of a volunteer would, all the way up to an EMT intermediate, which has the next step of certification, increased protocol responsibilities, as we call that, all the way up to a paramedic that can administer drugs and those types of things. That's the highest classification of certification in Ohio, and they really have the ability to do many, many things that you can almost do in an emergency room under the auspices of our medical control physician.
Safety forces, you're having a difficult time. I see the Akron, City of Akron had to reinstate the 8 officers because they were shorthanded, and they have specific roles to play, but they really are hurting for people, plus recruitment from Arizona. I heard the other day that they're coming in to the Akron, Cleveland area trying to recruit, so it's not an easy undertaking to keep your good people.
You are absolutely right. I think that has been the very recent problem area for lots of public service and public safety agencies. It's how do we retain, not only retain the folks that we have, but how do you bring new folks into the career and into the industry? And that's a challenge we're all faced with. Additionally, which doesn't help for communities like ours, it's really an employee-centric environment right now. Employees can pick and choose where they want to go and where they want to work, and there are a lot of factors that go into that. So it is a difficult time to find qualified, good people to serve in all sectors of public safety right now.
Why did the city come to the conclusion and city council that we needed an increase in the EMS budget?
Sure. So right now our current levy will expire in December this particular year. And we took a look at many factors when coming back to our public to ask for their support. We looked at things like existing call volumes and the increase that's been going on over the current levy cycle. We talked about the population growth within our community and those demands and needs that will be placed on our EMS staff. We talked about the demographic of our particular population. With an older and aging population, it's reasonable to assume that we will continue to have calls for service oriented on that particular demographic. With the amount of time that EMS squads are spending outside the city in terms of their transports to the Akron regional trauma centers, that was a factor in what's going on. In addition to some of the things you've already mentioned and questioned, Bruce, and those are things about increasing cost, increasing needs. We really identified that we need to invest in our staff and increase our staffing levels, and that is the primary basis for the increase in our EMS levy.
Is the EMS jurisdiction tied to the city limits of Wadsworth, or do you go outside the townships as well?
So we actually do have our jurisdictional limits within the municipal boundary, but we take advantage of an operational contract with the township, which allows us to provide fire and EMS services in the township area surrounding the city.
And how much of an increase in for the taxpayers will this EMS levy ask for?
Sure. So right now we all pay as property owners about $62.64 per $100,000 of appraised value annually. With the increase, well, the first step I want to make sure that I say is that number will remain the same. That's the renewal portion of the levy, the 2.5 mil renewal. That number won't change and actually will get spread amongst more folks in terms of what we generate on the renewal portion.
So in reality, that will really come down.
It should.
That effective millage would probably come down a little bit.
That is correct. It should. It should. The 0.5 mil increase that we're asking for, again, it's a very slight increase, 0.5 of a mil. That will amount to about $17.50 of additional cost for property owners per $100,000 of appraised value. So we're looking at in total, if the levy is passed, we're looking about $80.14 per $100,000 of appraised value.
Matt, we take a lot of pride in Wadsworth with our schools, our city government, the electric department. We can't forget about safety. It's, again, a local matter. We've talked about that, and people want to come into the community. They're dying to come into Wadsworth. sorry about that pun, but basically it's a community people want to come into, but we have to pay for some of those things.
That's right, and certainly, Bruce, I'm biased to my colleagues on the service side of the house. But when you look at a community, what you really start the onus is, are you safe in that community? Is your safety provided for in that community? And an EMS levy is a base support level of service that I think most of us all need at some point in our lives, and we expect to have it there available to us when we need it. That is the basis of levies.
I know you're excited about the new fire station down on College Street, but let me ask you, if this is voted in, will all the money be earmarked for EMS? In other words, some people always wonder if they vote for a levy if some of it doesn't go into other funds.
Sure. No, the EMS levy is EMS specific. And while we are excited about the station, it goes to much more than just the station related items. It goes to operational needs, things like personnel costs that I mentioned, supply costs, replacement of capital equipment, everything from heart monitors and step chairs all the way up to ambulances and the cost of our paramedics training. All of those things are part of the EMS levy.
And the levy will go in effect January 1, 2023, I gather?
That is correct.
And the duration of that levy?
It is a 5-year levy.
Okay. So you're not coming back the next year and saying, oh, by the way, we underestimated. Why don't you help me out with the process? You didn't say, oh, by the way, we need 0.5 of a mil one day because we've had a little more usage. This was a long process, wasn't it?
This really was. We don't take it lightly when we're adding costs and costs that will be passed down to taxpayers. So it took really the entire levy cycle to analyze not only call volumes and the needs and discussions within fire and EMS administrative staff, all the way through discussions with council, through whether it be our safety committee meetings or whether it be council as a whole, as to what we need and what we envision we will need for the future. So it took a process. It was analyzing a lot of numbers, crunching numbers, looking at needs into the future, and looking what we could honestly afford and provide to our community based upon numbers. So that's why, after a series of discussions, a lot of analysis on an annual and monthly basis, we approached council with the idea of going back to our community and asking for the support of a slight increase as well as the renewal on the EMS levy.
Can you tell our viewing audience about the response time? You indicated you had 4 units available at any given time. Let's say we had a crew going to a hospital with someone that had an illness, and yet another call came in. How quick, let's say the furthest point in the city from where the, and where do the units, are they in the unit 2 in the north end? Do they usually come out of there?
Well, we have 2 units at each station currently. We actively, as I said, staff 1 at each station. We can recall individuals to staff the 3rd and 4th one when we do that. But that's part and parcel of some of the experience we're seeing where we need additional staff in order to be effective with that. On average, Bruce, I would tell you we have response times that are below 4 minutes, which are outstanding. The standard time is about 4.5 minutes nationwide. We're below 4 on most months, and that's a number we track monthly with our safety committee, and Chief Linder reports to the committee on that basis. At times in the year, we're slightly above. At other times, we're slightly below. It is a factor as to how far we're going. If we're going to the furthest outskirts of the township, that takes us a little bit longer to get to from our stations than if we were going, say, to the square, if you will, and those kind of things. But we specifically monitor those response times and make sure that we're below the national standard, because that is a quality level of service, and that's something we absolutely demand. Again, another priority reason to go to the folks in our community and ask for their support, to add staff so we can maintain that level of support. Because when we get to a point where we're getting 3rd and 4th calls that are somewhat simultaneous in nature, we are relying more and more on mutual aid. We don't want to always do that. In order to not do that, we need to staff more people at the stations.
Why don't you explain a little bit mutual aid, what that apprises to, and we're in a time where cooperation, I see that between cities, between school districts. That's really important, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and that's what mutual aid is. Mutual aid is the reliance upon another agency to provide the same service that you're providing. And we do that, and quite honestly, it's been a hallmark in the fire service for over a century. The reality is nowadays we all find ourselves in this staffing shortfall where we don't always have enough to cover the calls. So we'll provide mutual aid service to the surrounding communities if they call us, and we're available to do that. Just as when we call them, when our squads are out at the stations or out at the hospitals or handling other calls, we'll rely upon our neighbors to provide those services to us. The reality in my mind as the Director of Public Safety is I don't want to get to a point where we're stretched too thin, and I don't want to get to a point where we're jeopardizing the safety of our own citizens and the availability of squads and crews in the city because we're out serving another mutual aid interest. So we have to balance that need. It's something we all need and depend upon the help of others, but it's something we also need to make sure we take a measured approach in to make sure that we're protecting our own citizens.
Could you explain the typical day, if there is such a thing, of an EMS employee? I say that without the background and knowledge of that area, but I would imagine some days are, stress-free, and others, like you say, a problem could compound another problem and something else down the road.
So I don't know if there's a typical day that I can say, but right. I'll give you a ballpark.
Okay.
First and foremost, we are averaging about 8 EMS calls, or 8 calls a day that are handled by our fire and EMS staff. That's quite a bit. So a typical day for an individual, depending upon what shift they're working, might include things like taking care of some training obligations early on, checking the squad and the equipment to make sure everything's in full working order, going out and handling those calls for service, coming back into service again, restocking the squads, making sure they're in there, taking a moment to grab their meal breaks when they have an opportunity, and then even at the end of the day, depending upon the day of the week, there might be a training in the evening time in which the crews are attending. So a typical day is packed solid with both calls for service as well as demands at the station, as well as demands on the road, if you will, and demands to restock and then fill your hours with some training time, those kind of things. Of course, in a 24-hour nature, at any given time, there's also an availability for some downtime for crews to be able to decompress, if you will, from the stresses of the day, the calls of the day, and then get ready for that next drop of the tones, as we call it.
I was really surprised, Matt, with the 4-minute response time, because I had some classes after my quadruple bypass, and they emphasize how important it is to get to the hospital. And with 4 minutes and then the drive, where would some of the hospitals be that our EMS crews would go to? And they probably have to feel really good about themselves to help people to get better and to get healthy.
Sure, Bruce, and I want to make sure I clarify. The 4-minute response time that I made reference to is the time it takes from our crews to get the call and get to the patient.
Right.
There's additional time in transport time and those types of things, but that is the important time, and really seconds count when we talk about EMS. Seconds counts whether it be in making sure that we have increased levels of positive cardiac experiences in emergencies, or whether it be stroke and brain matter related lifespan. So seconds count in EMS. It makes the world of difference. For our standpoint, that average is important, but we realize that there are times, whether it be commitments to others and those kind of things, that we won't be able to do that. One of the major factors is that if we're transporting to a trauma center, those are currently, whether it be in Akron or in Barberton, where our cath lab is that we oftentimes transport to. The vast majority of our calls, which don't need those trauma center related attention items, are still going out to the Wadsworth Rittman Hospital. And so we're still using that ER as much as we can in order to both be convenient as well as keeping our crews in service in the city. But the reality is, depending upon the patient's needs, we do oftentimes transport to the Akron area hospitals.
And would the siren be on, and would that be an emergency where cars would give way to the vehicle going to that facility?
Sure, at times if we're transporting to a facility and it's an emergency-based run, yeah, that would absolutely be lights and sirens.
Okay, what about the new we talked about the new fire station briefly. What impact might that have on the EMS department?
Well, it's going to have a big one and a positive one. First and foremost, the new fire station will replace current station number 1. So that'll be the area where we both house equipment and supplies as well as crew. There'll be new expanded crew quarters, so in the future as we continue to grow as a community, we can add crew and staff there where currently we can't do that at Station 1. The new building will also have enhanced training rooms and facilities. We'll actually have a community paramedicine examination room, so then when we have people who occasionally walk into the fire station with concerns and issues, we can actually treat in what resembles a doctor's office, if you will, an examination room right there in the station. We'll have that ability. We'll have increased abilities for the keeping of supplies and drugs within the facility. It'll just be a very different and improved scenario in terms of the environment in which our EMS staff work from. That's going to be a real important part of the new station.
I imagine the EMS and fire employees are pretty excited about a new facility. I see every day a little progress, a little more progress, but when I was here in the district, we opened the middle school,
right,
and the enthusiasm and just the positive vibes coming from the staff was just unbelievable.
Yeah, I think our staff is excited to get into a new facility. It's been a long time coming. They certainly deserve it. Our community deserves it, and we really believe we're going to have a great design and a great building when it's all said and done. Again,
just like the EMS levy we're putting on, that wasn't done in a day or a week or a month. The planning for that, as you mentioned, was long-term, and kind of looking at the growth of the city. The census says that Wadsworth about a little over 2% growth every year, and we're kind of steady growth. And I see the lots that are available are now houses being built. So that there's more potential runs there for the EMS. But it's really important to look forward.
Absolutely. We started the process of examining a new facility back in 2016 with a station study and analysis. And so it took us that long to get to the point where we have shovels in the ground, if you will, to get there. So it was a long time coming. But even before that, we knew that our current Station 1 was an aging facility that needed to be replaced. And so we looked at different areas of the city. We looked at the availability of land. We looked at the cost of land. It's all driven by our budgets and staying within our budgets. So the new station is going to be a real gem for all of us, not just the department, but the community as a whole. And the positioning of it's going to enhance our abilities to respond to different areas of the community.
What about one area that I forgot to mention was training.
Sure.
And retraining. Sometimes things change so rapidly and there's new medications almost every week come out. What about, first of all, retraining for your veteran EMS employees? How does that work?
Sure. So on average, our EMS certified employees do about 48 hours of training annually. They all operate under what we call our med control or our med control physician's license. So he requires, and the state requires, based upon their certification, every 3 years that they maintain a certain level of continuing education in EMS. And that changes dependent upon their certification levels. So I think if I recall correctly, an EMT basic has to complete about 40 hours of training every 3 years to maintain their certification level. An EMT intermediate or advanced EMT, they're called, they have to complete about 60 hours of training every 3 years. And then at the highest level, a paramedic has to maintain, in order to maintain their certification, has to complete about 84 hours, I believe it is, of continuing education every 3 years. But even with that, we maintain skills, as I said, about 48 hours of average training a year, which is both protocol knowledge on EMS protocols and procedures, but also skill-based training. So we emphasize highly the level of training that our folks receive, and that directly reflects to the quality of care that we provide.
Of the 43 EMS employees, how many women does Wadsworth employ?
We have a good number. I'd say there's approximately, I'm just trying to think through our staff there. We
I
do
threw
have
a curveball to you there,
Yeah,
Matt.
no, that was quite all right. We have a number. We could always use more. I think it's an area in the industry that there are more opportunities, and certainly there are more needs to have female employees. And we would welcome all employees, but certainly females who have an interest in the EMS service. We could use that.
Now, what about the hours for someone just coming in, the entry people? How many hours do they have to get certification?
That also is a state-run part of the example,
right.
There's different levels depending upon their certification.
Right.
That has an EMT level. As you advance through the different courses, there's different levels of certification. They increase in terms of how much time. You know, a paramedic program can take upwards of a year before you get through all of the paramedic coursework and then take the state test and pass those certification levels. So it depends upon the level of certification and the time that you commit to it.
Matt, I'm hoping that people will come out and vote. The in-person voting has already started last Wednesday, I believe, and it goes 8 to 5, and that's very important. Absentee ballots still have a few days to go ahead and get that in,
right.
And we want people to go out there and cast a vote. We want them to support Wadsworth and enhance the community, and this is their opportunity because we mentioned no federal funds, no state funds. This is the local people and citizens need to take care of this service.
That's absolutely right. It's vitally important for us not only to maintain the current level of service that we provide to the citizens, but anticipating growth in some of those needs and knowing some of our hurdles and obstacles that we have currently. We really need the passage of this EMS levy on November 8th in order to continue to expand the level of services and grow with our community.
Matt, I learned a lot about EMS services, and it is a separate entity, and it really does a good job, and it responds very rapidly, and you have flexibility. You have a lot more units than I ever thought to respond to things because you never know. It's kind of like insurance. We have to have it, but you never know when you're going to use it.
That's right, Bruce.
Thank you very much for watching Bruce on the Loose, and we'll be back next week with another important show. Thanks for viewing.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.